It is 3 minutes after 10. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And I mean, it's a curious day of news. I hope you had a lovely weekend, by the way. I really do. I don't know how those protesters have done it, but all the water on the roads this weekend, absolutely unbelievable. At one point on the motorway, on a big A road, I thought I was Noah. The scale of the waves coming towards us as a lorry went past in the opposite direction. How on earth those environmental protesters have managed to draw so much attention to the changes that we're currently wrestling with? And how on earth are the emergency services going to get through if the roads are flooded? I mean, there's going to be questions in the House of Commons about this. People are going to be banging their desks in newspaper offices up and down the land. I mean, absolutely astonishing. The failure of the authorities properly to deal with the simple matter of flooding. It's not as if the rain takes anybody by surprise, is it? The COP 2028 is underway. No doubt this will be under discussion. So, down with water. Down with the COP 27, I beg your pardon. Down with water is what I say. Down with pesky water, those muesli-munching globules of water that have brought huge swathes of the country to a standstill over the course of the weekend with their so-called woke floods. Absolutely ridiculous. Truly pathetic, the way in which these floods can just turn up and stop traffic from passing down roads without any warning. Where are the police, anyway? Where are the anti-flood authorities? Honestly, it's ridiculous. I have absolutely no idea where that came from. I should probably apologise for something of a non sequitur at the top. Well, you can't really have a non sequitur at the top of the show. But I know where I want to start, and I can't quite believe it. There's a sense, isn't there? I think it must be evolutionary. Don't laugh, all right? And don't accuse me of being too Pollyanna-ish or naive again, or doing that thing I used to do where I would bend over backwards to try to find some good in the government because the alternative is so bleak. I've stopped doing that until I start doing it again. In fact, would you mind pointing out when I start doing it again? It's a desperation. It's a genuine desperation born of the alternatives, born of fear of the alternatives. But given that I now have it on my record forever that I spoke warm words about Matt Hancock in the early days of the coronavirus catastrophe, I need to wean myself off the intoxicating drug of kindness. I seriously need to go cold turkey when it comes to giving people the benefit of the doubt. And the reason why I'm addicted to it is pretty simple, because the alternative is horrible. You get the shivers, you break out in a cold sweat. The alternative of believing that they are all as awful as each other, that we have somehow ended up with a governmental class, with a post-Brexit Conservative Party so utterly devoid of talent and integrity that Nadine Dorries being made Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport may be looked back on as a high point. Give it another year and people will look back on that as the glory days. Remember when we had cabinet ministers of the calibre of Nadine Dorries? Oh, how I dream of those days. So that's the alternative. That's why I keep doing it. That's why I keep thinking, maybe Sunak will be a bit better, or maybe, they're not all as bad as each other. At least Jeremy Hunt is in the Treasury. Don't mention what he did to the NHS. At least he understood the madness of Brexit. You see, that's why I'm addicted to it. That's why I keep having my fix once a week or once a month. I mean, I'm cutting down. I'm getting better. I'm now only really having to have a hit every month or so, every time they change Prime Minister, which is, I grant you, a little more frequently than any of us would ordinarily have expected. But just that idea, it can't be as bad as it looks, can it? Do you know what we used to call it? I've just remembered. We haven't mentioned this for a long time. Do you remember what we used to call it? The flesh-coloured body stocking. Do you remember the flesh-coloured body stocking? It got us through some tough times, the flesh-coloured body stocking. The idea that although the emperor may look naked, although the emperor may present as naked, although the emperor may even identify as naked, maybe he's not as naked as he appears. Maybe he is actually wearing a flesh-coloured body stocking, and therefore all of the people still refusing to admit, never mind countenance, the idea that he is as naked as the day he was born, are not all cultish and delusional. Maybe there is a slight scintilla of hope that things aren't as bad as they appear. And the emperor is, in fact, I think it was when Boris Johnson and Dominic Cummings were in charge of the response to coronavirus. Is that when we came up with it? You just sort of found yourself oscillating between the idea that there was some sort of sinister master plan, i.e. let the bodies pile high in their thousands, or that they were just making it up as they were going along and had absolutely no idea what they were doing, which was the sort of, let's skip the first 5 Cobra meetings and pretend that we can sort of bloviate our way out of an international pandemic. And then there was the desperate hope that there was actually a middle ground and that they had a plan, but it went to a different school, that they knew what they were doing and they were trying to do the right thing, but they were just bad at communicating, or they were too busy doing it to actually tell us what it was. And you derived enormous comfort, didn't you, from Chris Whitty and Patrick Vallance and a couple of other characters who at least seemed to be reflecting the reality that we could all see, while politicians seemed to be denying it. So that desperate hope, that inner plea, that scream, that silent scream, that things perhaps were not quite as bad as they appeared to be, that became what we used to call the flesh-coloured body stocking. Well, forgive me for this rather unpleasant imagery, but the flesh-coloured body stocking has now been violently torn off the torso of whoever happens to be the emperor. And then you do this thing where you think, oh, well, thank goodness Boris Johnson's gone. Liz Truss can't possibly be as bad as him. And she turns out to be every bit as bad as him, but just in an entirely different way. And then you come to Rishi Sunak. Who had a couple of moments. No? A couple of moments of positivity. I mean, he seemed to be aware of the scale of the threat that the coronavirus was going to pose to the economy. The furlough, admittedly, it was, it was our money in the first place, so to speak, or at least if it was borrowed, we were the ones that were going to have to pay it back. But he did actually protect large portions of the economy, albeit that he completely abandoned 3 million people, something which I imagine sticks in the craw of the victims when they watch him progress effortlessly into Downing Street. But that, he eats out to, what was it called again? Eat out to help out or something. Even that looked like quite a good idea at the beginning, if you weren't a virologist and you were just desperate for a return to normality and you quite like going out for your tea. Even that looked like quite a good idea, even though it almost certainly did a lot more harm than good. But that, and he just looks a little bit normal, a bit shiny. He's the kind of bloke you might have rented a flat from when you were at college. He's got the look. He looks a bit like an estate agent. He's albeit in a much more expensive suit than your average estate agent can afford. But I'm doing it again, except I'm weaning myself off it now. The drug of hoping that the next one will turn out to be better than the last one. I'm weaning myself off it. Okay? But he did look less. He didn't look as unhinged as Liz Truss. And he didn't seem to be as depraved as Boris Johnson. And I still don't think he is. I don't think he's as unhinged as Liz Truss. And I don't think he's as depraved as Boris Johnson. But he's going to be awful in his own special way, isn't he? Just like Liz Truss's awfulness was a very different brand of awfulness from Boris Johnson's awfulness. So Rishi Sunak's awfulness, which has taken a lot less time to establish itself than I expected. So Rishi Sunak's awfulness is a very different kind of awfulness. It's an awfulness born of cowardice and querulousness. The man wouldn't say boo to a goose. He put Suella Braverman back in the cabinet. The day after a terror attack that was built upon far-right ideology, the Home Secretary that Rishi Sunak rehired a week after she'd resigned in disgrace, or been fired in disgrace, used the language of the far-right. She used the insightful vocabulary of the far-right terrorist groomers who had almost certainly bent the brains of the bloke who launched the firebombs at the processing centre in Dover. That's cowardice. He did it because he didn't want to have to fight an election against the bloke who got beaten by the woman who got beaten by a lettuce. And now we turn to Gavin Williamson, and I am sorry. I'm sorry for reminding you of this man's existence. I'm sorry for reminding you that you inhabit the same universe as Gavin Williamson, and I am doubly, triply, quadruply sorry to remind you that to give him his correct appellation would now involve calling him Sir Gavin Williamson, a knighthood for one of the most inadequate, ridiculous and unpleasant politicians to ever hold office in this country. A man who felt that a response to a terrorist attack from a superpower was to tell them to go away and shut up. a man who apparently exercised the worst sort of schoolboy Machiavellian machinations in order to get people to do what he wanted when he was chief whip, and a man who keeps coming back like an unflushable item. And now this story this weekend is, I'm afraid it's just gross. I don't really know Wendy Morton. She was chief whip for 10 minutes under the last Prime Minister, but my goodness me, this litany of abuse that he has directed at her, the text messages that veer from the foul mouth to the downright obnoxious, would be bad enough if they were not actually built upon the foundation stones of the late Queen's funeral. On what possible planet? Where are all the flag fetishists now? Where are all the people who felt that Britain had turned a positive corner when cabinet ministers would appear on television with 78 Union flags behind them and a portrait of the Queen on the wall? Where are you? Are the people who dared to call others unpatriotic? Where are you? When a cabinet minister and a member of the Privy Council is effing and jeffing to his heart's content at the actual chief whip because he can't get a ticket for the state funeral of Her Majesty the Queen. This is just gross. And what's grossest about it is that Rishi Sunak was told, and he's already doing that horrible weaselly thing where they go, well, I was made aware of the issue, but not the detail. I was told that a complaint had been issued, and I was made aware that some messages were being examined, but I didn't actually see the messages, and I wasn't fully aware of the nature of the complaint when I decided to put him back in the cabinet. What did Theresa May sack him for? Was that fears over a security breach? So he got shown the door as Secretary of State for Defence because Theresa May thought that he might have been playing a little bit of fast and loose with national security. Then he got the boot as Education Secretary after presiding over the mother of all fiascos. Do you remember that? They opened primary schools in the morning because they were safe and closed them again at home time because they weren't. And then 2 cohorts, the GCSE and A-level, more than 2 cohorts as it turned out, having their lives turned upside down and their future thrown into disarray and confusion because Gavin Williamson can't lace his own shoes. So he got shown the door as Secretary of State for Education as well. What did Rishi Sunak do shortly after bringing back a woman who'd been fired in disgrace as Home Secretary 6 days previously? What did he do shortly after giving her job back? He put Gavin Williamson back in the cabinet, despite knowing that he stands accused of vile bullying of a female colleague. And other female colleagues are now coming forward. One minister reporting or relaying or alleging that he actually cited a difficult incident from her personal life when trying to persuade her to vote in the way that he desired as chief whip. That's on the front page of the Times newspaper this morning. The man is monstrous, isn't he, by any measure? The worst kind of bully, because he is a bully. His bullying is born of his own inadequacy. And yet something about the post-Brexit Conservative Party allows people like this to flourish, people like this to thrive, people like this to rise to the top. 10:16 is the time. I think today we will allow ourselves a simple question and an important one. Rishi Sunak and Gavin Williamson. Gavin Williamson and Rishi Sunak, right? Sacked twice for being awful. I've reminded you of the detail, but we can all agree on the simple summary. Sacked twice for being an absolute weapon, all right? Already accused of vile bullying of a female colleague over the Queen's funeral. That to me is important. I'm not somebody who adopts a performative, dewy-eyed, bogus patriotism over the royal family, but I thought that the Queen's passing was an incredibly poignant moment and actually an example of national unity that I'd almost forgotten what it looked like. And Gavin Williamson used it as an opportunity to bully a female colleague in vile, foul-mouthed text messages because he blamed her for him not getting invited. Where are all the flag fetishists now? Why aren't you calling? Why aren't you baying for his political blood? I don't know. So 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. The time is 17 minutes after 10. The question is this. Why did Rishi Sunak put Gavin Williamson back in the cabinet? That allows you to bring expertise to the table, if you have any. I'm not sure I do. I can't even begin. I know why he brought Suella Braverman back, because she offered to support him and help him avoid running for election against the guy who got, well, sort of, he's the guy that got beaten by the woman, isn't he? He's the guy that got beaten by the woman that got beaten by the lettuce. So Why did he do it? And what do you, again, front of the queue, if you're a Conservative member or voter, what do you feel about this? What does it say about post-Brexit Britain? What does it say about the current political landscape that this man, this cipher, this oath can be put back in the cabinet as one of the first acts of a new Prime Minister that was supposed to be, remember, reintroducing professionalism, integrity and honesty? Hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. And I love that word from Ryan. The thing I've been addicted to is hopium. I am a hopium addict. My name is James, and I am a hopium addict. I keep hoping that in the absence of a change of government, the new lot will be slightly better than the last lot. The new Prime Minister will be measurably better than the last Prime Minister. It's taken 2 weeks to realise that Rishi Sunak is his own kind of awful, but his awfulness is every bit as awful as Liz Truss's and Boris Johnson's. What's going on? Why is this man in the Cabinet? And what does it say to you about Rishi Sunak as Prime Minister? 0345 6060 973. It is 22 minutes after 10, and it's a morning for weaning ourselves off the hopium. I don't know how many other hopium addicts there are out there, but it is apparently the drug that the League of Legends community would call hopium. And I'm afraid I will have to ask Ryan, who has texted me this, what League of Legends is. I presume it's a sort of MMORPG, one of those big video games, is it? I don't know. Anyway, hopium, the desperate belief, that the need to believe that however bad things seem, that the new lot will be better than the last lot. And yet Rishi Sunak, with the appointments of Suella Braverman and Gavin Williamson, has demonstrated himself to be already his own unique kind of awful. So why has he done it, and what do you make of it? Talia's in Penzance. Talia, what would you like to say?
I just find that...
Can I just, before you start, I just say, don't push me about, Talia, all right?
No, I'm not even going to mention Brexit. That's it. But I think I haven't got a lot of hope, really. And through all that, the process all over the summer, when they weren't actually doing anything, the governing wasn't happening, as it hasn't been for God knows years. But I just think that, nobody does the right thing. Nobody thinks about what they're trying to do to help people, what I thought politicians went into it for anymore from this government. And I think so appointing Gavin Williamson, it's obviously you've got this hierarchy, you've got all the people, the sycophantic types in there still, you've got people just in it to win it. I've seen a party that, to my mind, they just are so desperate to keep winning that I have never seen decisions based on what's the right thing to do. I just can't.
When was the last time? When was the last time? Because for me, I derive enormous, I don't know quite what the word is, succour maybe from Amber Rudd's resignation, believe it or not, because that seemed to me to be an act of principle in the traditional sense. But maybe that's my hopium withdrawal symptoms kicking in. Maybe that wasn't actually that. But I think it was. I think that was a different age, that pre-Johnson period, when corruption wasn't commonplace.
Yes, Johnson started me getting involved, and I think what I saw recently when, we had the awfulness over, I kept thinking to myself, will some MPs resign? There was was it Charles, and he did this speech at the same time when the one in Wales did a brilliant speech, and he was so upset by the Conservatives, and then this Charles, I can't remember his name, but an MP, was so upset, and he just said, I'm so upset with what's going on. And I thought, that's the first time I've heard or somebody out there speak openly and clearly, just honestly from his heart, about how upset he was with his party. And everyone else, it's gone silent as far as I can see. And
it's incredible, isn't it?
It is. And if you had children, I just think, I've got 2 kids, and I see them being taught at school how to be good citizens and to grow up, and that's what I think is the most important thing. You teach people to be good.
That's such a good point, and I think that used to be self-evident, and there used to be hypocrisy, and there used to be lies, but there was a sense that if you got caught, then there would be consequences. Right, you could wriggle and you could squirm, but if you got caught, there'd be consequences. It's almost a year to the day since they tried to save Owen Patterson's bacon after he was found to be breaking the standards, breaking parliamentary standards in the most egregious fashion. Almost a year to the day, and that seems to me to have been quite a big breaking point, although we possibly didn't properly clock it at the time because it took another few months for Johnson's administration to unravel. But the idea that you get caught and you get punished, and then they try and get you off the hook, that was a new low.
Yeah. And the chap that left with the by-election that went straight away, he did something wrong and he left. And I thought, and then the media stopped talking about it. It's gone because he did the right thing.
So
but
Charles Walker, you were thinking of?
Charles Walker.
Yes, relatively recently when talking about, a specific issue, I think, of Suella Braverman. But you're right, and you know, they are thin on the ground, and he said himself he can only do it because he's leaving at the next election. Talia, thank you. For anyone who is unaware of the scale of the offence of Rishi Sunak, not necessarily Gavin Williamson, although Sunday Times printed the messages yesterday, which is, for anyone wondering where I got the phrase "don't puss me about" from, which I won't be using again in the programme, but that's one of the things that Gavin Williamson said to the then Chief Whip, Wendy Morton. The Sunday Times published the text messages, which I'll share with you shortly, although I'll have to censor some of them. The Telegraph takes up the story today with an assertion that Rishi Sunak was not only told about the formal complaint by the then party chair, which would be Jake Berry, another one with a flipping knighthood. They give him out like Smarties, the day before the reshuffle took place, but he was also urged to look into it before appointing Gavin Williamson, or Sir Gavin Williamson, to give him his full ludicrous title, to his cabinet. A source told the Telegraph the PM was told about it and advised that he should not appoint Williamson without checking the complaint. The formal complaint came in later that day, and Williamson was appointed the day after. He may not have seen the messages, Sunak, but the fact that he chose not to is on him. It's just awful. It's irredeemably and demonstrably awful, and yet it feels normal now, right? That's what Talia, the frustration Talia was expressing. Oh, well, he hired a Home Secretary who got fired a week before for appalling behaviour, and he's brought someone back into the Cabinet who was fired twice for appalling behaviour and was in the absolute midst of an appalling accusation, now more or less wholly vindicated with the publication of the text messages that he sent. And why? Because he was having a hissy fit. He was throwing his rattle out of the pram over the fact that he couldn't get a ticket for the Queen's funeral. My God, what an appalling insult to that woman's memory. The idea that a member of the actual Privy Council, look it up, it has resonance, it has meaning, it has historical worth and value, and God knows how he ended up on it, but a member of the actual Privy Council is having a peevish, pathetic, puerile hissy fit over the fact that he couldn't get a ticket to attend the Queen's funeral. My God, the arrogance of the man, the sheer conceit of a man who would prioritise his own presence on a pew over the dignity and the respectfulness that occasion demands. And what did Rishi Sunak do? He put him back in the cabinet. Put him back in the cabinet, despite knowing that all of this was unfolding and despite being told by the then party chairman, don't do it until you've really got yourself across about what he's now been accused of, because it is probably even worse than the two things that got him fired from two previous cabinets. Brexit Britain, where the Conservative Party's talent pool has become a puddle of something unpleasant. 10:30 is the time. Dominic Ellis is here with your headlines. 10:34 is the time. Big picture, perhaps, would be helpful, because I get stuck with the little picture sometimes because I do this all day, every day. Here's a senior backbench MP talking to the Daily Telegraph. Putting him in the Cabinet Office is a disaster. This is the man who couldn't run education, who leaked national security secrets in defence. He has screwed up almost every department he has ever been in. They also disclose nicknames for Sir Gavin. Among Tory backbenchers include Mr Bean and Frank Spencer. They're not exactly Oscar Wilde, are they? But hey-ho, on the basis that he is a rather pathetic individual who gets everything wrong. Williamson himself said last night, I of course regret getting frustrated about the way colleagues and I felt. Already, you see, not me, it wasn't me, it was me and colleagues. Colleagues took your phone off you, did they, Frank, and punched in the messages themselves. Also, that's not fair on Frank Spencer. Frank Spencer was a really loving man who cared passionately for his wife and daughter. The idea that Gavin Williams, I mean, he was also very clumsy, but his clumsiness was endearing. I don't think he should be called Frank Spencer. Possibly unfair on Mr Bean as well. I don't know quite who you'd compare him to. He went on, he's got a touch of the Partridges, actually, I would say, wouldn't you? He's got a touch of the Partridges rather than the Beans or the Spencers. Anyway, he himself said, I'm happy to speak with Wendy and I hope to work positively with her in the future as I have in the past. What would happen if you sent messages like this at work? Think Very poor how privy councillors who aren't favoured have been excluded from the funeral. Very poor and sends a very clear message. All right, fair enough. He's cross because he's not allowed to go to the funeral. Wendy Morton replies, that is not the case, Gavin. Well, it certainly looks it, which I think is very and perception becomes reality. She's probably read in a Judge Dredd comic. Also, don't forget, I know how this works, so don't... he's written puss me about with a U. That might be a typo. If it's a typo, then I would need to deploy the... as I said above, and you can tell Wendy Morton's got that tone that you adopt when you're dealing with a drunk mate or when you're dealing with a colleague who is just, constantly getting on everybody's nerves. As I said above, that's simply not the case, Gavin. The number of places allocated was extremely limited. And he goes on, it's very clear how you are going to treat a number of us, which is very stupid, and you are showing all interest in pulling things together. Don't bother asking anything from me. Also, because he's sent that and then he's still cross. So he's pressed send and then he's gone, I'm Sir Gavin Williamson. They can't treat me like this. Wendy Morton should go away and shut up. So he sends another text and he goes, also, this shows exactly how you have rigged it. It is disgusting. You are using her death to punish people who are just supportive. Absolutely disgusting. Now he's bringing the late Queen into it. And she replies again, Gavin, again, this is not the case whatsoever. Well, he replies, let's see how many more times you us all over. There is a price for everything. That's a blatant threat. I don't think you could send a text like that in your workplace, could you? Really? A, the swearing, and B, the threatening? I don't know, maybe you could. And she comes back, I think you are wasting my time. No, beg your pardon. Gavin, as I have said, that is not the case. That's the first, second, third, fourth time she said that this is not the case. And back comes Big Gav. I think you are wasting my time and you are obviously intent on not being upfront nor willing to listen to concerns and have decided to isolate people. Isolating people by patiently and repeatedly replying to their unhinged, foul-mouthed texts with a simple explanation that what you think is happening is not happening. And then the next morning. Morning, Gavin. I hear from your whip that you are probably not voting this evening. Is there a problem? We are on a 3-line whip. Thanks. To which he replies, thank you for the patronising and condescending tone. This is a man who was swearing at her a few hours previously. Thank you for the patronising and condescending tone. You're welcome to come and see me and explain. He could have added woman there, right? He wouldn't send messages like this to a man. He could have just added woman there. We all know someone like this. You're welcome to come and see me and explain, woman. But instead he adds best wishes. And then, because he's still cross and he's sending another one, he's got to send another. Come on, Gavin Williamson. You do know you can speak to people in your job. You don't just text them. So this is incredible, actually. Let's get a little bit forensic on this one. Because this is the same minute in which he accuses her of a patronising and condescending tone. So this is the level of the man's self-awareness. He accuses someone else of using a patronising and condescending tone, and in the same breath adds, you do know you can speak to people in your job, you don't just text them. Now, I don't know what the dictionary definition of patronising and condescending is, but I think it's well within the bounds of possibility that it features a small photograph of Gavin Williamson. That is the definition, the distillation, the very essence of patronising and condescending. And he has accused her of that in the previous text. And then back to Wendy Morton, who I know very little about, and I am addicted to hopium, but I'm beginning to feel quite sorry for her. Ready? There is absolutely no need for you to take this tone, Gavin. I am trying to help. And this is where it actually gets quite surreal, because Gavin Williamson replies, how are you? As in, how are you trying to help? And Wendy Morton responds saying, I'm fine. Did you see? So she says, I'm trying to help. He says, how are you? As in, how are you trying to help? But he writes, how are you? And she replies, I'm fine. And then his little head explodes. Because presumably, I mean, she might have been mocking him. I don't actually think she was. Because if someone sends you a text saying, how are you? ? Like literally, those are the only 3 words there. What are you going to reply? You're going to reply, yeah, I'm fine. But a bit confused. Why is he asking how I am? He was being incredibly, unspeakably rude to me 2 minutes ago. And then his little head explodes because she says, I'm fine. He goes, no, how are you helping? But very glad you are fine. Look at my voting record. Step back and think how you're dealing with people. And then maybe talk to people. Here it comes. Are you ready for this? I'm currently with my poorly dog. Pardon? I'm currently with my poorly dog. I am currently with my poorly dog and the vets. So I will give you some time to reflect on how you are dealing and treating people. To which Wendy, Mother Teresa Morton, responds with the words, I need no lecture from you, Gavin. When I ask a civil question, I will call you later. Just think, for a few seconds she thought maybe a little modicum of civilization had been restored when he asked how she was. And then his head truly swivelled off his shoulders. 10:41 is the time. Why is this man in the cabinet? James is in Bristol. James, my apologies. I didn't realise I was going to go into quite so much detail about that text exchange, but I feel it was a public service and I'm glad that I did. What would you like to say?
Well, first, obviously, thoughts and prayers to his dog.
Yes, of course,
The fact that it had to live with him. But I think the issue we've got is the fact that we've got a government that isn't a meritocracy. It's populated by people that have supported whoever's in power all the way through. So we're not seeing the best people in the best roles. We're seeing those that have hung on, backstabbed, and almost connived their way.
I'm not sure there's a long queue of competent, professional, honest people possessed of integrity and professionalism around the corner. I mean, you're right, but equally, who could be on the team sheet that isn't?
That's the thing. It's a difficult one to say.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's the whole party.
They've had so many people go through.
Yes.
It's tough. I mean, you've got Suella Braverman that's in there, who realistically is having someone that is a bit of a racist bigot sometimes, in charge of that sort of stuff. The best place, probably not. I mean, Ben Wallace is doing a great job.
She of course would dispute that and understandably point to her own background as an insulation against any accusation of racism. But bigotry would be hard to challenge. Personally, I'd go further now that we know that attack in Dover was a terrorist attack and that she chose the day after that to use the language of far right terrorists when she talked of an invasion. I think that's the big problem there. But she has a job. She's Home Secretary. He put Gavin Williamson in the cabinet without a job. He basically gave him a bauble. I can't for the life of me work out why.
Well, he supported him, and that's the thing. It's jobs for friends as opposed to looking through, however many members of parliament they've got and going, all right, who's the best suited to actually do this? And as a result, we're seeing, a government that's making a lot more missteps. I mean, realistically, we've not been on a decent level footing really since Cameron, unfortunately. And as a Lib Dem, I hate to say that, but we've had a consistent string of cabinets and governments that have been boys' clubs.
Progressively worse. Theresa May tried. I think that cull in 2019 of politicians who insisted on telling the truth about Brexit reduced the talent pool to a talent puddle, and then the idea that you had to turn a blind eye. I'm writing about this for my next book, so you can do some research for me now live on the radio. You try and pick the truly pivotal points in the collapse. And I think that, oddly, given that they're not cited that often now, but Barnard Castle and Owen Paterson were two truly terrible moments in British political history, because that was when the mainstreaming, the validation of lies and corruption moved squarely and cleanly out of the shadows into the light, didn't it?
Definitely. I mean, I've been to Barnard Castle.
Go on.
It's not like it's a castle in the middle of nowhere. It's in the middle of a town. You can't park next to it. You park on the high street. You're there, you're going there, you're walking past people, you're knowingly endangering other people at the time due to COVID. It's like that was all just stupid. And the fact that, yes, obviously, whoever's in charge should back their staff, but when they've done something wrong, you call them out on it and you make adjustments. And they
didn't just let it slide. They actually turned it into a television entertainment. The lies, the absolute lies. Michael Gove now giggles about the time he came on the radio the next morning, I think with Nick, and began to pretend that it was perfectly normal. Giggles about it. Michael Gove giggles about, yes, I nearly actually ended up saying that I do actually often go for a drive in order to test my... That absolute corruption of the most basic requirements of public life is not funny. And yet there's Michael Gove. Is he back in the cabinet as well? Is Michael Gove back in the cabinet? It's so hard to keep up. And will Gavin Williamson be in it by this time tomorrow? Thank you, James. 10:49 is the time. Exciting news in this building at the moment. Coldplay just been announced for the Saturday night at the Jingle Bell Ball, which is absolutely one of the biggest nights of the year. Anywhere, certainly in our family and in showbiz circles. 10:49 is the time. Back to Gavin Williamson. So it works on every level, that, doesn't it? Rishi Sunak's put him back in the cabinet, despite the fact that he was fired from education for being... was he the only person Boris Johnson ever fired? Was he? And in fact, he didn't fire him at the time, did he? It was a reshuffle. It wasn't like, my God, man, you're an absolute disaster. You're fired. It was, muddle along a bit until we can dress it up as a reshuffle, and then I'll give him a knighthood. Good God, that's what he did. He gave him a knighthood to soften the blow of being fired for being an absolute weapon. Every day that I'm with you, I find myself thinking, that's the one who sums it all up. And of course, as I wean myself off hopium, I realise they all sum it all up. So you sit here and you think, Liz Truss is the one that sums it all up. Or you think, Kwasi Kwarteng is the one or you think Dominic Cummings is the one that sums it all up. I'll tell you who sums it all up. Boris Johnson sums it all up. I'll tell you Gavin Williamson. They all sum it. James Cleverly, oh my God. Suella Braverman. They all sum it all up. That's the breakthrough. That's the penny drop moment today. They all sum it all up. There's not one who sums up the absence of professionalism, integrity, and honesty. There's not one of them. They all sum it all up. And hopium addicts like me thought that Rishi Sunak might be different. Richard's in Brentwood. Richard, what's going on?
Hello, James. How you doing?
I'm all right, mate. You've got to laugh, Richard, haven't you, eh? You've got to laugh. If you didn't laugh, you'd cry. So I'm grateful to Gavin Williamson for those text messages, although I sympathise with Wendy Morton for having to receive them.
Well, I think that's it. I mean, you've got to laugh, haven't you? But listening to James from Bristol there, I mean, I agree with everything he said about the... I think even the government wouldn't argue that, obviously they put in place their supporters when perhaps there were more...
You always do that up to a point. You're not going to hire your harshest critics to be in your cabinet. But the problem is support now means turning a blind eye to appalling conduct and appalling behaviour.
Yeah, exactly. But I mean, I think with Gavin Williamson, it certainly seems to me that it's far darker than that. I mean, I guess before he became a minister, he was quite a senior whip, wasn't he, in the Tory party?
Yeah, but he was a chief whip.
Yeah, exactly. So he would have been privy to every kind of deep, dark secret and bit of misbehaviour from every Tory MP on the benches. So, that list doesn't go away, does it? So it would seem to me that I can't explain any other... There's no kind of obvious reason as to why he would be put in such senior positions. And not only that, to get his knighthood as well, unless he's got something to hold against, the likes of Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss before him. That just seems the obvious reason to me, that he's got something on all of them that, what Gavin says goes, other than obviously getting to the Queen's
even more than that, of course, is that this reminds us of what he's like when he is hurt. This is what he's like when he thinks he's being crossed, when he's the victim of a perceived slight. And I say perceived slight because he even uses the word perception becomes reality. In other words, it doesn't matter what's true. If this is what I think, I will make it reality and you will be toast. So you know how he behaves towards people who upset him.
Exactly. I mean, the WhatsApp messages kind of point to that. They give back that up, really, in my mind. And also, I remember during COVID, he had a photo taken when he received one of his new positions. It might have been the Education Secretary position, with the famous one with the whip next to him as well, as if to say, I've got dirt on all of you. Yeah, and he just, he beggars, but I find it quite depressing, really, as you've got to laugh, because otherwise you get depressed about it, because in any other... probably a decade ago or before, people would have resigned or they'd have been fired. There'd be no two ways about it.
6.5 years ago, mate. You can trace it back to June 2016. Before that, there were, and even a little bit afterwards, which is why I mentioned Amber Rudd more times than is probably healthy. But the idea that, I mean, again, picking the milestones. Owen Paterson almost a year ago. Dominic Cummings about 3 years ago, was it? Just those two events where they essentially said, we are completely corrupt. We are absolutely detached from reality. Honesty, integrity and professionalism are not just strangers to us, they are our sworn enemies, and you're either with us or against us. And every single one of them said we're with you, signed up.
Yeah, And I mentioned about James, the previous caller. There was a lady that called before that. I can't remember her name. But I've got young kids as well, and Talia, yeah. And you try and raise your kids in the best way, and with the best examples. And these are the people that are supposedly leading the country. It's incredibly depressing.
You can lie and you can cheat. That's one thing. But if you do, then the authorities, in this case your party leader and Jacob Rees-Mogg, who of course was tasked with the job of getting Owen Paterson off the hook by tearing up the whole rule book full of rules that Owen Paterson had broken, we won't just ignore you. We will actually try to save you. We will actually try to rehabilitate you. You drive to Barnacosi, you break the rules that you helped write regarding lockdowns, just tell a barefaced lie. As long as you can't be sued, as long as we'll get the lawyers to go over it. I'll tell you what, be 20 minutes late to make the announcement in the Rose Garden because we're getting the lawyers to go over everything with a fine-tooth comb. Everyone knows you're lying. Everyone in Cabinet's going to pretend that you're not. Everyone in the country knows that you are. But we're just double-checking that you can't actually be sued. And you'll remember, of course, that Rishi Sunak's speech, and that was when I had my last massive hopium high. Do you remember? I was off my face that day on hopium when Rishi Sunak actually used the words professionalism, integrity and accountability, although not necessarily in that order. Integrity, professionalism and accountability at every level. That was my last hopium high. Seriously, I was gurning everything. I was so high on hopium for about 10 minutes that day. Because I honestly thought that was him saying, look, I've had to go along with it because I'm in the tent. I've had to go along with it because I was Chancellor. I've had to go along with it, but I know how rotten this is. I know how rank this is. I do know. I'm Rishi Sunak and I know how rancid the last lot were and the lot before that, who I was also Chancellor for. Integrity, professionalism and accountability. I said, inject that into my veins, I said. That pure, sweet hopium. And it lasted 10 minutes, that high. And he pointed to Suella Braverman that afternoon, didn't he? My God. And Gavin Williamson the next day, despite having been told about the offence that he now stands accused of by Wendy Morton. Kim's in Winchester. Kim, what would you like to say?
Forgive me saying this, but I think you're being a tad unfair.
Probably. On whom?
No. I mean, I don't mean that, but it's not to Williamson, but to Sunak. I genuinely feel that in Sunak we have, I feel and pray, I should say, that we have a sea change. And I just think that
you're still on the hopium. I will, but I'm just pointing out this is a hopium addict.
Hopium is a good thing, but Williamson and Braverman, hopium. Williamson and Suella Braverman were just the despicables. They are the price that we and Sunak have to pay for not seeing a resurgence of Boris. And, however big the price is, well, I think it's a true one. I mean, on that weekend, he obviously was juggling all sorts of issues and people in his ear, telling him this, that and the other. And he had to do whatever and his team probably had to do whatever they had to do to make sure Boris didn't come back. And I thank God every day that didn't happen.
Well, do you? Because, I mean, I don't know if you caught my introduction or whether perhaps you nodded off halfway through it. But the point about them being different, them being awful, uniquely awful in different ways. So Truss, you probably felt. Did you have a bit of a hopium high when Truss got the nod?
Initially, yes.
You see?
I thought when Boris went, I thought, how wonderful.
At least it's not Johnson, it's Truss. So you had a hopium high. And then what happened?
I did. I got it wrong.
Yeah.
I got it wrong.
Here you are again.
Not necessarily.
Jacking up.
At some point, I might get it right.
That's true. No, that's what gets us out of bed every morning. And I hope you're right. But I mean, Braverman and Williamson knowing that Williamson, and also, the information they'd have received, it was only confirmed by the authorities this weekend that the firebomb attack in Dover was terrorism. But he's the Prime Minister, she's the Home Secretary. They'd have been party.
Forgive me, you're conflating too many things there.
I'm not.
Obviously, Sunak knew there was a complaint. There were a million things going on that weekend, and he obviously said, yes. We got to do whatever it takes to stop.
This is weird. This is like being at a hopium addicts meeting, and I've reached the 6th step, and I'm watching someone who's just turned up for their first meeting, and it's you.
No, I haven't turned up for the first meeting because I've got it.
I really think you should come along.
I've called you previously to apologise for voting to leave, but let's not get into that one.
You're a textbook hopium addict.
But no, I genuinely believe, having seen what Sunak has done, I think we have a different quality of individual. I think there's a different intellect. I think there's a different sense of integrity. He is weighed down by some of these horrible scenarios that he will have to deal with. And as his position strengthens, and it will do, obviously we've got to get past next week and see how terrible that is. But as his position strengthens, I'm sure we will see. I'm praying. I'm on my knees, and I'll come back to the hopium session.
I mean, maybe you've got really good gear. I don't know, or maybe I don't know. Life is better on hopium. I don't know what he needs. Ammo Maguire now. So I know Lee listens actually. Lee McDonald, who plays Ammo. I always think of him if you're my age when you're talking about this kind of addiction. But I'm glad that we can keep it good natured. And thank you for all the lovely words actually this hour about how we managed to find so much humour in such dismal pickings. But it's important that you do that. However, for the record, Gavin Williamson's conduct is absolutely appalling. I can't prove it, but I'm supremely confident that he never would have addressed a man like this in the way that he addressed the woman, and I cannot believe that Rishi Sunak chose to look the other way when he was told all about it. 3 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. A lot of people asking me to talk about Twitter. That's a first. Normally people are asking me to shut up about Twitter. I'm not even exaggerating. I didn't see the punchline to that gag when I started at the top of it. Most people are normally saying, I'm not, but a lot of people, I don't know that I've got anything interesting to say. Don't all shout at the same time, it's never stopped you before. I don't know if I've got anything interesting to say about Twitter at the moment. I don't know what's going on. Elon Musk seems to me to be one of those people who doesn't really understand what he means when he says freedom of speech. Obviously, the fact that he's made an awful lot of money means that many people think he must therefore be brilliant at everything. It's a bit odd that. You don't really think that about sports people. Nobody thinks, David Beckham's made a ton of money playing football. Why don't we put him in charge of NASA? But Elon Musk has made a ton of money doing stuff, and therefore he must be a genius about lots of other things as well. It doesn't really work like that. In fact, it never really works like that. But he seems to me to be one of those people who thinks that freedom of speech somehow means allowing or amplifying blatant lies or unsubstantiated opinion. Whose truth is it? Why do you rely on journalists or experts? And that's kind of scary when you consider that America has been brought to its knees by people who believe Donald Trump's lies, who continue to believe Donald Trump's lies. An entire political party utterly filleted from the inside out by the lies, like a cancer at its heart called Trump, spreading to almost every tentacle of it now. And God knows what's going to happen in the midterms, but it almost certainly isn't going to be pretty. And any success the Republican Party enjoys is built upon millions and millions and millions of people believing blatant, proven lies. That's terrifying. And that's happening in a world where Elon Musk doesn't think that blatant, proven lies get enough respect or, quotes, freedom, end quotes. So that worries the hell out of me. But I don't know enough about him. I don't know enough about who knows. So I don't know that we'll do it as a topic. Sometimes when I haven't decided what we're going to talk about next, I glance at the clock. It's 11:05, and I think to myself, well, I'll just carry on for another couple of minutes and see if anyone rings in before I've even asked a question or anything. But of course, they're probably ringing in to complain. Or it's a wrong number, but they're saying, where's my McMuffin? I ordered it half an hour ago. Poor old. I don't know, but I don't think I'm ready yet to talk about Twitter. I tell you what I'll do. I'll change my mind at 12. If I have a bit of a reverse, then I'll change my mind at 12 o'clock, because I think this is really important and it's horribly serious. This story. There's no room for levity here. We won't be able to inject attempted comedy into proceedings as we did in the last hour, because I want to talk about the terrorist. The firebomber of the migrant centre in Dover, who was motivated by terrorist ideology. This will not really have come as a surprise to anybody who's been paying attention, but you have to wait for the authorities to confirm or to reveal their findings. The police have said that he was... I never know what to do with the names either, by the way. I don't know. I mean, he's dead now, of course. In many ways, killed by whoever it was that radicalised him. I think that's an important point to remember. You could probably not say that about an Islamist terrorist. You couldn't suggest that there should be some sympathy for a suicide bomber because they've ended up being killed by whoever it was that radicalised him, because you'd get metaphorically lynched in this country. But I presume I can say it about a white bloke, can I? He has ended up being a victim of whoever it was that radicalised him. The only person he ultimately killed was himself. And there's an element of tragedy to that if you approach it from a human position. I hope I'd have the guts to say that in the context of terrorist attacks that were not motivated by extreme right-wing terrorist ideology, but were motivated by other forms of extremism. But I don't know that I would have the guts to say that in the climate I inhabit. We all, I suppose, self-censor, don't we? Whatever Elon Musk might believe. But I don't know what to do with the names. I mean, he wasn't clearly seeking martyrdom or hero status. Was he seeking hero? Some people felt that the terrorist who assassinated the late MP was after some sort of hero status himself. There was a and we know that there's so many stories that jump into your mind when you start talking about stuff like this, isn't there? So David Amos's killer was clearly radicalised. Nobody had any hesitation to say so. This bloke clearly radicalised, and yet there was an enormous hesitation to say so. It's strange, and I find it quite scary. 8 minutes after 11 is the time. Who radicalised Andrew Leake? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. They've been through his belongings. They've got his evidence. They've got his electronic devices, and they have concluded that he was, or the attack was, and I quote, motivated by a terrorist ideology. They've spoken to people. I quote again, a number of significant witnesses have been spoken to during the course of the investigation, and a number of items of interest have been recovered, including digital media devices. Evidence from examining these items suggests there was an extreme right-wing motivation behind the attack. So let's pause for a minute. Let's pause for a minute and wonder what that extreme right-wing motivation might have been. Okay? You don't have to pause. You can ring me. Let's write it down. Let's get this absolutely right. The extreme right-wing motivation. What might it have been? Okay, let's start with invasion, shall we? So the idea that asylum seekers and refugees who have arrived in this country, a country that does measurably less than any comparative economy to help people in these desperate situations, a country that is by no means suffering its highest levels of application in recent history, is somehow being invaded. So I say to you, who radicalised him? And you probably have one name jumping to the front of your mind straight away. Anyone who uses the word invasion. It was in a British National Party manifesto as long ago as 2010, and it was in the mouths of our Home Secretary the day after this terror attack took place. So what does it mean? Extreme right-wing motivation. I think it employs words like invasion, doesn't it? Because invasion, as the dictionary teaches us, ordinarily applies to things like enemy armies and diseases. You don't get invaded by asylum seekers any more than you get invaded by refugees, or you get invaded by good Samaritans, or you get invaded by ordinary people. That's just movement. So we've got invasion. Who radicalised this man? 0345 6060 973. What else would count as extreme right-wing motivation? I guess it would be, I don't just not want them here, I don't want them alive. Would that be it? Or I don't want any of them here. So we touched on this with a caller, I think, on Friday. This idea that you don't mind helping, but it's the wrong sort of help because it's happening in your part of town, or it's the wrong sort of help because you're poor, or it's the wrong sort. So, obviously, and again, the right-wing newspaper columnists and the racists and terrorist sympathisers who infest our media now, when it's this sort of terrorism, they won't point this out. But if they started putting asylum seekers in wealthier parts of town, there would be a very different kind of uproar, but the uproar would be identical. The uproar would be identical, right? I can't believe that they've put them in a leafy suburb when I don't live in a leafy suburb. How dare them? So where can they live? So you don't want them in the poor parts of town because that's not fair on the poor parts of town. There's a presumption there immediately that asylum seekers are undesirable, or that you wouldn't want to live next door to them. Okay, so that brings us to Nigel Farage, doesn't it? Because he didn't even want to live next door to Romanians who were here to work. Never mind asylum seekers who were here to flee various horrors. And spare yourself tenpence if you're thinking of saying there aren't any wars in France. Just Google the most basic tenets of A, what we currently do, and B, what international law currently demands. Because the people who pour that poison into your ear, when it comes out of your mouth, it's not poison anymore. It's undiluted stupidity. So they pour poison into your ear, your brain processes it, and what comes out of your mouth is base ignorance. And they do that to you. okay, the people pouring the poison into your ear. Your brain then transfers it, due to the influence of British media quite often, into pure, undiluted ignorance. And that's what comes out of your mouth. And it might work on your Uncle Keith's Facebook page, but when you're playing with the grown-ups, you just look like an idiot, okay? And almost always a racist idiot as well. And I know you're not, so do better. So we'd have to put Nigel Farage down, because he doesn't want these people living anywhere, especially not next to him. And that's just Romanian construction workers. Never mind asylum seekers who've actually got different coloured skin from Northern Europeans. So we've got invasion, and then we've got neighbours don't want to live next to. So where can we put? Where would these people go? Where would we be comfortable with seeing these people live, settled? People who go on to become valid and valuable contributors to our economy and to our society. You could think of the extreme examples, like my friend Wahid Aryan, who's a doctor up in Cheshire and works, as far as I can tell, 36 hours a day doing his duties in the NHS and running magnificent charities. Or it could be someone plying their trade at a very simple level, someone who just getting on with the business of driving a cab or working in a shop. I don't know what it is. I don't care. I don't judge them any differently from how I judge you and your contribution to our society. I bet they're not the kind of people to launch foul-mouthed tirades because they can't get a ticket to the Queen's funeral. What do you judge people by? Their behaviour or a word on their passport? Do you judge them by their conduct and their character, or do you judge them by the country of origin? Because if you're judging them by country of origin, then you're going to have a problem with the King's dad, you're going to have a problem with the Prime Minister's dad, you're going to have a problem with the Deputy Prime Minister's dad, you're going to have a problem with the England football captain's dad, and you're going to have a problem with the England cricket captain's dad. Not to mention the Chancellor of the Exchequer's wife, the Home Secretary's parents, and the Foreign Secretary's mum. Yeah, so you don't, do you? What's going on there? What is an extreme right-wing motivation? What is it? 03456060973. What does it look like? Because the minute you start trying to answer the question of who radicalised this terrorist, I suspect you're going to stick your fingers in your ears, close your eyes and start whistling Dixie, because it is an almost undigestible truth that men like this are radicalised by household names in this country. They are radicalised by a direction of traffic that has been adopted by some of the most senior politicians in Parliament, up to and including the Home Secretary, who has been warned, just as her predecessor, Priti Patel, was warned, that using phrases like lefty activist lawyers could actually cause and incite terror attacks on lawyers' offices. And guess what? It did. So what did Suella Braverman do the day after this terrorist launched a firebomb attack upon a migrant processing centre in Dover? She deployed the word invasion. And we're all pretending it never happened. We're all looking the other way. I'll tell you now, and I'll tell you for nothing, that if an Islamist terrorist had launched that attack and it had been similarly and thankfully unsuccessful, we'd still be talking about it. It would have been on the radio every day last week. Not only that, but they'd be talking about how all the people in the migrant processing centre were probably going to grow up to be just like he was. So why aren't we talking about this? What are they frightened of? Simple question. Answer it however you want. Perhaps the best way to answer it would be either from the first person. Say, James, I can tell you who radicalised him because I used to be like that myself. 03456060973. Or do it from the second person, which is pretty simply, James, I can tell you who radicalised him because it's happening to my dad, or it's happening to my brother, or it's happening to my Auntie June. Who radicalises these people? Who pushes people to a place where they consider asylum seekers in a processing centre in Dover to be, in the first instance, let's do the entry level, to be worthy of contempt? That's extreme right-wing ideology. That's terrorist incitement. That's grooming. Okay? Worthy of contempt. Who encourages you or your loved ones to actively hate these people? Okay? That's question number one, because that's incitement. 03456060973. And then question number two, because it's a thankfully big step from hatred to trying to hurt or trying to kill, but it's a step on the same road. It's a road of radicalisation. If you have been persuaded to hate those people there, you have already been radicalised. So who does that? Who radicalised him? 03456060973. That's all. Where is it? Who radicalised him? How could a man a 66-year-old man from High Wycombe, how could he end up believing that his time could be well served? And you know, I appreciate that there are often mental health issues involved in these sort of behaviours, and I appreciate that if you mention that in the context of an Islamist terror attack, you become some sort of traitor, whereas if you mention it in the context of a white supremacist or whatever this extreme right-wing motivation turns out to be, then you become some sort of, well, you might think you're a patriot, but you're a terrorist sympathiser. You're a terror apologist, pure and simple. So you've been radicalised as well, sending me a text saying, can't believe you're sticking up for the Muslims, or whatever it is that you're thinking of sending me. You are a terrorist sympathiser. That is what you have become, a terrorist sympathiser. And guess what? Someone did that to you. Someone radicalised you as well, just as they radicalised him, because you're on the same path, because you think that what he did was in some sense justified, or that the people that he tried to do it to in some sense deserved it. You've been radicalised. You've been groomed. Didn't happen in some backstreet mosque. Didn't happen in some secret madrasa, as we're told it does with Islamist terrorists. It happened, I believe, in this country in 2022. It happened in household name newspapers. It happened on national television and radio. It happened in plain sight. So why do we put up with it? That's your final question. 0345 6060 973. Who radicalised the Dover terrorist? And if the answer to that question is, as I suspect, obvious and terrifying, why do we put up with it? Why on earth would Suella Braverman, the Home Secretary, deploy precisely the language of exactly the extreme right-wing terrorist ideology that prompted this man to launch fire bombs at the Western Jetfoil site in Kent last Sunday? A week and a day ago, a serious terrorist attack upon the most vulnerable people in this country undertaken on British soil. 24 hours later, the Home Secretary deployed the language of the extreme ideology. A week and a day later, everyone's looking the other way. 0345 6060 973. It is 11:23. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The man who firebombed the processing centre in Dover was motivated by an extreme right-wing terrorist ideology, police have said. So who radicalised him? 0345 6060 973. Sam's in Charlton. Sam, what would you like to say?
Oh, yes, hello.
Hello.
Excuse me if I'm a bit nervous.
It's only me.
Right, so I saw my family on Saturday, my immediate family. Now, they've always been Conservative voters, and I'm not. I've always been Labour, and I've, argued my case forever. But I noticed a very different atmosphere this time. So we had nice fireworks, party, etc. But then the subject of immigration came up, and the hate that was demonstrated in what they were saying was like way, way bigger and worse than I'd ever experienced before. And I see my family sort of once a week, maybe once every 2 weeks, and this subject comes up now and again.
Sure.
But this time it was different. This time it made me feel sick, to be honest. And I just felt like, my brother-in-law was saying, he sits on the train now and he looks at like there's not a white face there, and Albanians. I mean, what they were saying about Albanians, I just was like,
Albanians are white, aren't they?
Oh yeah, but because of all what's been said recently by Suella Braverman, and there you go. So my point is that for me is a direct result of what she's been saying and the press, the Daily Mail, and the likes of those papers have been saying, because I saw it.
Do you know, it's fascinating that you say you meet them, you hook up every week, because it's a week ago today that I sat here and said, this is about to get really, really ugly. And the reason it's about to get really, really ugly is because they've broken everything and they've got no one to blame it on. So they're going to have to, even though the numbers don't support the rhetoric, even though the reality is a million miles away from what they're going to claim, they're going to have to inflate hatred of asylum seekers to such a degree that it distracts attention from the fact that they have screwed up everything.
Oh, well, they're winning on that then.
But what I'm fascinated by is the fact you track it from week to week, and in the last week it's exploded in your own family.
Yeah, I saw it. I felt like I was in some kind of societal study. Wow. I saw it. it's made me feel sick because I'm so frightened of what's to come now, because I've seen my family change that much from the rhetoric that's coming out of the government.
Yeah.
I mean, they're whipping it up. Where is this going? Where is this going to end? It's terrifying.
What? I mean, can you ever? I mean, you probably tried and given up, have you?
I know what you're going to say. Yeah, I've tried and tried and tried. I get into arguments. Yeah, I've tried. And, they would listen more. Yeah, and don't get me wrong, I love my family, and they've never been this extreme as they were this weekend. So
that's fascinating and heartbreaking and utterly unsurprising, because, I mean, it must have a response. We've had a few years, actually, of not having the front pages full of this stuff, not having the media barking at the moon constantly, not having frontline politicians or even sort of, no marks who couldn't defeat a dolphin in an election. They've all been sort of shuffled off to the side slightly. And then this last week, it all moved back to front and centre, almost as if, I mean, bizarrely, given that terror attack, you'd expect that to have given pause to people. You'd think, crikey, this rhetoric is causing terror attacks now. Maybe we should dial it down a bit. And Suella Braverman came stood up in Parliament the next day and dialed it up to 11.
Yeah. I'm really afraid of where this goes, because it's becoming not even asylum seekers, and that's bad enough.
No, it will extend. Of course, it will extend.
It's extending into basic racism.
Well, your brother-in-law's talking about people with dark skin on the train. We're back to Nigel Farage's comments about people not speaking English on the train shortly before going back home to his German-speaking children. 28 minutes after 11 is the time. Of course, a lot of you are reminding me the word illegal should be right alongside the word invasion. So who radicalise these people? Answer: anyone in the public eye who calls them illegals or illegal immigrants, because they're not. They're technically and legally not. You could make a case for claiming that they had no legal right to be here after their application had been processed and rejected, but up until that point they are asylum seekers. They are not illegal immigrants. So illegals and invasion. You hear anyone using the word invasion, you hear anyone using the word illegals, then they are grooming and radicalising the next extreme right-wing terrorist in this country. And please God, there isn't one. If you believe in God, if you don't believe in God, then please, there isn't one. But if there is, you can guarantee that they will be completely persuaded by the use of words like illegals and invasion, and they appear on the front pages of national newspapers. They are uttered by Home Secretaries in Parliament. Imagine if this was the other way round. What would the equivalent be for Islamist terrorism? Infidels, probably, for illegals. Be infidels for illegals. And what would the equivalent of invasion be? I honestly don't know. But it's exactly the same. They're like two cheeks of the same backside, two sides of the same coin. And yet so many people from Sam's family right across the country, so many people think that there's a profound difference going here, and that's not terrorism. No. But that's absolutely awful. And in fact, you should treat anybody from a certain religion or from a certain part of the world, anybody at all, as if they are actually a terrorist. But when someone is actually a terrorist, if they're from a different part of the world or they have different coloured skin, then they're not actually terrorists at all. So non-terrorists pose a terror threat to racists and bigots and groomers and radicalisers. Actual terrorists aren't really terrorists at all. And it happens under our noses. It's not even the fringes anymore. It's not even the sort of ugly fringes like Farage. It's smack in the middle of the House of Commons. It's the Home Secretary. It's the whole government. Dominic Ellis is here now with your headlines. It is 11:34. There is an invasion of illegals. There isn't. But if you believe there is, then, well, I'll read you something, actually. Anthony in Southampton, I'm really grateful to you for sending this. James, this is interesting. I found myself defending metaphorical attacks on migrants as a response to the sheer amount of information I've been fed about this recently. I think he means as in, verbal attacks or criticisms rather than physical attacks. And I'm not even on Facebook. It's all mainstream stuff for me. So if someone like me is starting to think that we are under attack, I can't imagine how the right-wingers are reacting. Thank you for pulling me back to the land of the critically thinking sane. I wasn't starting to go extreme right by any means, but I was starting to wonder if they had a point. And I'm very grateful for your honesty, because it's pointless pretending that all of these people are demons and vampires. that they are pushed into a position of horror. And they are pushed there by people who regularly get paid for it, either in actual money or in power and attention. Any hate preacher is high on their own supply. Any hate preacher, although they will probably never endanger their own lives, they just encourage others to do the same. They'll never endanger their own liberty. They'll just encourage others to do the same. Any hate preacher is doing it in part for attention. Even if they believe what they're preaching, they are high on the attention they receive, the status they are given in society. So when you're talking about the proverbial mad mullah, somehow it's easy to work out who radicalized the terrorist. But what if the hate preachers have columns in national newspapers? What if they have radio and television shows? What if they're all over your Uncle Keith's Facebook page? And they don't sort of look different or alien from the normal? What if they're what if they're in Parliament, the actual hate preachers? Because if they're using words like illegals and invasion, they're hate preachers. They're radicalizing people. They are terror apologists and quite possibly inciters of terrorism. They just are. It's not an opinion, that's counting. So who do you think radicalized the Dover terrorist? 0345 60 60973. We should have asked this really, I'm sure we did on this programme, about Joe Cox's killer as well. We don't even need to ask who radicalised David Amos's killer, because that's baked into our national DNA now, the notion of Islamist terrorism. It happens in it happens in mosques and it happens in madrasas. And of course it does in large part. But for every one terrorist who comes out of an Islamist grooming process, there are 1 million Muslims in this country who'd go no more near terrorism than you would. And yet this bloke's got people queuing up in my inbox to defend him. So that's a radicalised population. Really scary, this. I talk about it and I get cross that other people don't, but it's really scary. It's just luck, dumb luck, that this man in Dover didn't kill anyone except himself. And because of the way I'm built, because I'm one of those bleeding heart liberals you hear so much about,